This is Computing Up, conversations about computation writ large with Michael Littman and Dave Ackley. This episode was recorded October 20th, 2021, and there were a few technical glitches, so this is lightly edited, but the flow of the conversation still comes through.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back. Dave, it's good to see you. How's your fall going?
Well, I'm glad that it sort of cooled off. It's getting really, really nice out here. So I'm also going to take November off from the big project and everything. So I'm really looking forward to that. Well, see, I'm not actually admitting that.
Okay, all right.
Because there is other stuff I want to do as well. But from, instead of being 100% on T2 tile, robust first, all of the stuff, just to let other stuff come in and not feel guilty about it. That's kind of what November's about.
Well, how
about you?
I'm a little bit behind on watching your T2 video updates. But the one that I watched most recently, you actually called me out by name, which is always embarrassing. And oh, you don't remember this because it was two videos ago. But you basically you followed a piece of advice that I gave you, and then you referred to the AI 100 report, which had come out
right
this month. And so for those who haven't heard about this is a report that's issued every 5 years, supposedly for 100 years. This is the second report, so there's still 90 years to go. But I was tapped to head up the writing of the report this year, and I put together this amazing panel of scholars who study various different aspects of AI so that we could work together to put together some kind of almost like a progress report, like what's going on in the field, how is it impacting the world, what does it look like the future of this is going to be, and what things should we watch out for. And that was a terrific experience. So one of the things, so sorry, go ahead, Dave.
No, I was just saying this is just representative of my Michael model, that, he's so friendly, everybody loves him, and therefore, people gather around him and everybody does stuff and it's great.
Okay, I totally don't understand that, but
oh, come on.
Okay. Along those lines, I got to meet some really cool people, and one of the people I met is Karen Levy, and she's our guest today. So, Karen, thank you very much for joining us on the show.
Thank you for having me.
So yeah, I thought, well, first of all, the stuff that Karen does is super interesting, and I think deserves as much airtime as it could possibly get. But I also thought it would be really fun, Dave, in particular, since you haven't really gotten to know what she's about or hear much about the AI 100 or these kind of broader issues. I thought as a computing up topic, it would be really appropriate. So what do you say? Let's dive in.
Sure.
All right. Cool. So Karen is a professor at Cornell University. And why don't you tell us a little bit about what your current role is, and then let's go backwards a little bit and talk about how you got there, what path you followed, because you didn't follow the computer science path, but you are making contributions to that community, and so it's really cool that these things have managed to intersect.
Well, thanks. Yeah, I have definitely kind of wandered my way to my present position, but I'm currently an assistant professor in information science at Cornell. And I'm affiliated with the law school here too, as like a secondary appointment. And I kind of ended up here. I started out I'm a lawyer and a sociologist by training. So after undergrad, I went to law school, poked around in the law for a little while, learned a little bit about how the legal system works. I clerked in a federal court for a couple of years, kind of seeing how things play out on the ground. And then went and got my PhD in sociology.
Oh, wow.
And about that time kind of got interested. I was actually initially interested in architecture. I thought about becoming an architect. And I was really interested in kind of like thinking about how buildings structure the way we interact with one another and the kind of communities that we form, which the law does too, right? The law kind of functions in that way. It has, this is like classic Larry Lessig stuff, right? Different ways that different kinds of forces change the way we are, the way we behave, the things we believe. So when I went to study, exactly. So when I went to study sociology, I thought I wanted to study that. And it turned out that like sociology of architecture is not a thing really. Like that's not a subfield. Nobody does it. There's like two people who do that.
Which could be a good thing. Yeah.
It should be. Yeah.
Well,
I know architects think about it, right? When they're designing spaces, they are trying to think about these issues that touch on sociology, but that's not their training. So it seems like a thing that should be. Yeah.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was thinking too. As it turned out, though, the place where like most of those topics were being discussed that I discovered after starting graduate school was in IT policy. So the building where I got my PhD at Princeton. The building where sociology is next to the building where the Center for IT Policy is. So I would like wander over to steal lunch from them and listen to their talks, and that's where computer science is too. And I got to kind of realize that like all these questions about how we structure systems, like all those questions were being asked and answered in computer science. So I kind of came at it from that side.
So when you went to law school, was that something that you loved the law, or your parents always said you had to be a lawyer or a
Lawyer, doctor.
doctor, or what was it?
Uh,
What took you there?
yeah, I mean, most to be totally honest with you, Dave, it was mostly inertia. I went to law school in the same town where I got my undergrad. I thought the law was really interesting. My parents were certainly not
Uh-huh.
disappointed that I decided to go to law school.
Okay.
But I mostly just thought like I've always been kind of a rules person. Like I've always just been interested in like why are these the rules? Are the rules the things that
Uh-huh.
we say are the rules, or are they not really the rules? Um,
Right.
And
Yeah.
is
but
there
I did, yeah,
is there are there sort of parallel tracks in the law? So I'm familiar with academic computer science. We have
yeah,
there's systems and there's theory and there's AI and there's graphics.
yeah.
Within the law, are there people who are more asking these kinds of almost philosophical, sociological questions, as opposed to the people who are in law school because they need to, like, it's a profession and you need to learn about the law
Right,
so that you can actually practice law? Do you
right.
know during law school, do people kind of break off into these different modes, or do you just everybody kind of studies the same stuff at that point?
Mostly it's much more standardized. So everybody is kind of studying the same stuff, like in order to become a lawyer. Some people, of course, are starting to get interested in legal research, but it's not like getting a PhD, right? Where like everybody's there to do research. It's a relatively
Right.
small proportion of people that do that work. So I didn't really think about research. I just thought, well, the law is pretty interesting.
Mm-hmm.
When I worked in a court, like the style of research that you learn how to do is very different, right? Like I would do research so that the judge could make a good decision in a case. So it was actually a great kind of trial by fire about how to learn a lot about something that seemed maybe a little bit boring on its surface.
Oh,
But like if you dig into anything, it's intellectually interesting. And every people like to say that like every legal dispute is like a really dramatic story usually, right? There's usually very deeply
there's
held.
conflict.
There's tons of. I mean, it's very juicy,
Yeah, there's
which was
conflict
great.
and there's resolution, and so there's plot.
Yeah,
Uh, um,
there's a narrative arc to every case. So I really liked that. I didn't think I wanted to practice though. Like I didn't see what was interesting to me was the way the law was working as a system, and you don't really get into
right.
that if you're representing clients.
Right. I mean, that's super fascinating. I mean, so rules and the rules that govern systems can stretch from architecture to law to information technology. And
Hmm.
Right. And just to be
that,
clear, like the words rule, the word system, and the word architecture, these have very important meanings within computer science, because
Hmm.
we are trying to think about these larger systems and how they are caused to form, and then ultimately how they support the different things that we actually want to get done.
Yep.
yeah.
Yep.
So I certainly want to, by the time we end today, I want to circle around to the architecture of rules for human society and figure out how we ought to do that right. What do you say?
Okay, I think we can probably get there in the next half hour.
Well, I think it's just a matter of
We'll figure it
focusing.
out.
Okay, great.
That's why it hasn't been solved so far. People just haven't put their
We're just
minds to it.
not the right podcast.
Yeah, exactly. All right, but so now it's official that you're doing information technology. You got an appointment as well as leftovers in law and so forth. And so, how does one go forward with that kind of background in
Yeah.
computing?
So most of what I like when I was in grad school, I was kind of pecking around for a dissertation. I really wanted to find a place where we could find like one rule that was being kind of implemented, like a rule that was being implemented sort of by law and by architecture, right? We might think of that as something that's happening manually because somebody's saying you should do this, and something that's happening digitally where like we're building a system that makes it hard for you not to do the thing. And people have written about this before. Sometimes people call this perfect enforcement, right? The idea that technology sometimes makes it impossible for you to violate copyright, or much more difficult, at least, than if somebody just tells you not to do it. So I was looking for that, and I ended up finding a field site where that transition from analog to digital enforcement was happening in truck driving. We can go into it if you want to, although maybe you don't want to go into too much depth about the ins and outs of trucking regulations on this podcast. But I found this transition that was happening at the Department of Transportation, where rules that truckers have to comply with about how much they can drive each day and each week, they were starting to be enforced via like tracking devices in their trucks. So I ended up writing my dissertation and now a book about surveillance technology in trucking and the enforcement of rules and automation of kind of compliance with those rules. So most of my research, as in information science, has been about kind of that confluence of like rules and often surveillance technology, which is usually a way that we kind of determine if somebody's breaking the rule, whatever rules are in quotes. And that ends up often leading to like surveillance and privacy concerns.
And do you think, is there any sense in which on par it's a disaster, or it's a totally mixed bag, or you should burn the whole thing down? Where does it come out?
What is the thing here? Like computers?
Well, let's say the truck
trucking surveillance. Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. Let's just run with that,
because it sounds like it may have come from a reasonable intended place, but then it also opens up a Pandora's box, and the question is, have they been Pandorified or not?
Yeah. No, it's a great question, and you might think like, if we have a rule and we know that people aren't following the rule, making them follow the rule or keeping a better account of the things that they're doing to make sure they're telling the truth doesn't immediately sound like the worst idea, right? Presumably we have this rule for a reason. And I agree, sometimes like there are rules that are so important that we follow them that it makes sense to enforce them that way. Sometimes though, I think what happens is that we take a rule that maybe is like a poor fit for the way people live, right? Or the things they have to get done, like the fact that they have to put food on the table. Like, so in truckers are like very well known for being overworked and underslept. Like they just drive themselves off, sometimes literally to death, because of the way the economic structure of the industry is organized. So they only get paid when they're driving, basically. They're paid by the mile. And we didn't change that, right? Like that economic organization remains. The only thing we did is we changed it so that like, instead of writing down how much they drive on a piece of paper, we do it with a computer. So that doesn't actually change any of the incentives in the industry. It doesn't change the fact that it's like very, very hard to make a living. It doesn't change the fact that they're still incentivized to find ways around that, because like that's what their employers demand of them. So it's not that like this is the wrong way to do it. It's that if we do it and we don't think about the root of the problem, then like it's not obvious that we're going to get where we want to go.
Right. I mean, what I wonder is and I feel like, especially in computing, we have this superficial, simple-minded idea that we can just come in with an algorithm and make things better. And we always has these absolutely massive knock-on effects 90% of the time, because in order to run the algorithm, we are centralizing a whole bunch of stuff that didn't used to be centralized. Like, for example, keeping your logbook in your truck about how many hours you run and so forth. No longer need the logbook because that's all been centralized. And to me, that is perhaps part of the explanation about why there's always these allegedly unintended consequences for surveillance and privacy and loss of autonomy and agency and all of these things that seem to be happening over and over and over again. And does that make any resonance?
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I mean, some of what I write about in this book is that like, we end up we centralize the knowledge source. We change what knowledge is valuable, right? So it used to be that truckers used to be called like the captains of their ships, right? Like it was a ship captain model, where like the person who knows what's going on I-80 around me in terms of weather and traffic and my body and how ready I feel to drive was like the trucker, right? Like nobody else had that information. He had it exclusively, and he could tell other people if he wanted to, right? But he could also just not, right? He could just, back before cell phones, right? Like he would just call on a payphone to the dispatcher when he wanted to. And now, like, not only is, to your point, right, that information is available in real time in the back office, But so it's predictive information, right, about is he likely to have a crash? Is he likely to quit his job? Comparative information about, what are other drivers doing on I-80 there now, right? Which changes the game, right? It means the trucker no longer has autonomy to make those decisions for himself. And right, like then as it's obvious that we would do this, right? We end up building in different monitoring capabilities to serve different goals, right? So like insurance wants to get in on this game.
Right.
Companies want to now that they have this computer in the truck, they want to track like which drivers are fuel efficient, right? And they can do that because they're all bundled together in this one device. So to knock-on effects is a good way to think of it, right? Like it's not clear if these are intended or unintended, but it's a package, right? It's a package of effects.
Well, and it seems to happen over and over and over in all of these disrupted fields, in a sense. Now, I suppose, could there be a hypothetical fantasy scenario where somehow the captain model of the truck, somehow the captains, suppose they had a captain's guild of truckers, so they had the power somehow, and they could say, well, now we're going to have GPS, and all GPS information must go only to the captain of the truck, and the captain of the truck can decide what to do with it, and it would be information technologized again, but it would be a very different human computational structure. But the problem is the wrong people have I don't know. One set of people have the power, therefore they adopt technology in a way that's biased towards preserving and increasing the stuff that's good for them, while just letting the rest hopefully not get too much of a dumpster fire.
I think that's right. And I think, with any technology, there's a lot about the way I don't think anything is inevitable, right? And there's plenty of variability in how different companies do things. There are companies that still say like, yeah, we have this and we're keeping this data, but we're not looking at it, right? Or we're looking at it, but we're still going to like let the driver make decisions. So like that stuff, nothing is a foregone conclusion. There's also ways in which, to your point, right? Like, when you said like a captain's guild, right? Like there are ways in which having a bunch of the truckers have been really independent for a long time. The rate of unionization in the profession is very low, right? Like having the ability to share some information can be really useful, right? So there are some applications where people kind of contribute their data to find out like where is there going to be a long wait at a terminal, for example, like where am I going to have to sit there waiting to get unloaded at Walmart for 3 hours? That's like,
well, I guess that goes all the way back to CB radio, as sort of the truckers guild sharing information.
Absolutely, right.
Go ahead, Michael.
I didn't want to derail you. I just wasn't sure if you were ready for the next topic or not. Do you have more on this one?
Move us on.
All right. So
I could talk about trucking for like 5 to 6 hours, but I assume that the podcast is no long.
Well, we like hearing.
It hasn't been before, but
maybe it's time to change course, guys.
Well, can you tell us like one or two other rules?
Truckers listen to a lot of podcasts.
Yeah, well, that's right. That's right. They're probably and because you got your eyes are busy, but you got time to kill.
You guys could be the official podcast of truckers.
There's got to be some really good trucker podcasts already out there. That
there's
would be
really good.
Sure.
There are some really good ones. There's also I got to be on a lot of truckers have Sirius XM radio.
Yeah.
And I got to be on their show on Road Dog Trucking once to like answer calling questions. It was really fun. It was really fun.
Wow, cool.
That's really interesting. I remember when I was a kid, I got CB radio, Citizen Band Radio was fascinating to me. And so I got, my dad got one for the car and I gave myself a call sign and stuff. I learned
what was your handle, Michael?
It was messed up. Yeah, it was bad.
Come on.
Well, so
I feel like you have to tell.
The family's cat was named Ling Ling because the Chinese pandas were a big thing at that time. So you can now you can date me, figure out how old I am based on it. And so
my mission in life.
A lot of the lingo, the CB lingo, it was like, I don't know. So I called myself the One Ling, or One Ling. And my dad was like, I'm pretty sure that not hearing you right. And they think it's one wing and that you only have one arm. And I'm like, why would they think that? But it was definitely, and it was prepubescent. So I had a really high voice. And so it was, the truckers mostly tolerated me, but occasionally they would be like, can you please just like turn off your radio. Like we
Get off the
need this
channel.
channel for something else. Yeah. So it was, but I did the fact that they had codes, right? Like 10-4, 10-20 was another one. Like they had they had numbers that meant things in the world. Like I was destined to be a computer scientist because I thought that's the coolest thing. You could use numbers to represent concepts.
This is so you and I both
so
can
much
thank
shorter.
Right. Right. It's so much shorter, so much more convenient to say 10-20 instead of location. Smokey in a plain brown wrapper. Like it was a code. It was language. It was so fun.
It's lingo. Dave, do you have a CB handle? I feel like we should.
I do not. If it's not, Burt Reynolds, I don't know about it. So, yeah. Well, what can I say? Long Island didn't have any trucks. I don't know how food got to us.
I'm pretty sure there were trucks and boats. So, in terms of tell us some other kind of rules. Like, what other kind of to the extent that this industry runs based on, setting up structures, like we love structures, like that's fascinating to us. So if you could tell us a couple of those, I bet that would go over well.
I mean, sometimes I think the rule can be like a legal rule, right? Like a very, a formal rule. Sometimes though, a lot of, I think what we might think of as just norms or like behavioral expectations also kind of take on this format. So some of my other work has looked at like intimate relationships and family relationships and the way we think about privacy within households. I've done some work on like elder care, like how do we monitor our elderly relatives or our children or our partners, right? And sometimes that can edge into like very obviously problematic and abusive stuff. Behavior. Yeah, I mean, it doesn't take long before it gets pretty dark. But a lot of it is like actually much more equivocal, which is why I actually like it as a research area, right? Where there's there may be a legitimate interest in making sure that your parent is okay or that your child is okay, and thinking about kind of what are the boundaries of that surveillance is really interesting to me. So I raise this because, like maybe I don't have a rule that my partner has to come home after work or something, right? But maybe that's the expectation, and there's some advantage to like maybe not always having a record of your kid's location or something, right? Like socially, there's obviously a lot of good and bad stuff that happens in those gaps between like what we say we're doing and what we're actually doing. But some of it is good, right? Like some of that is like space for growth or can be protection.
Exactly. Yeah. So when my kids, I guess my oldest was in high school, my youngest was just getting into college, and my youngest was starting high school. There were some signs that some things had gone awry in terms of their internet usage, and so we had my wife decided we're going to crack down hard, and we locked down the internet. We had passwords on everything. We just, controlled a lot of stuff. And it made me very, very uncomfortable because of this sort of like, where's the autonomy? Where's the ability to kind of like test boundaries and really understand things? Like I really didn't want to go there, but things had gotten bad and I kind of let her have her way. And we came out the other side, and I think it really did help. But we had to, actively switch out of that mode once we had kind of cleared the forest fire. And I don't know if they're like good examples of how surveillance is used in a positive way, and then it doesn't turn into feature creep and ultimately like poisoning relationships. Is it like ultimately, does it just come down to common sense, culture, like people being in touch with their own morality, or because it's hard to imagine how we're going to solve this with more algorithms, right? More rules.
Although I think there are things I agree with you that it tends to often just creep into more and more and more. But there are some, I think, examples of like pretty sensitive design that tries to account for some of this. So like, I remember reading at one point, for example, about it's probably defunct now, but some startup that was launching like team driver monitoring technology, right? Because a lot of parents obviously want to monitor, where is my kid? Is my kid speeding? Are they out past curfew? Are they driving too fast? Like reasonable. But at the same time, teenagers are like almost adults, right? And there's a lot of privacy interest there too. So the way that they had structured this particular program was like, it was time bound. So you got 100 hours of monitoring, and they said, that's enough time to learn how to drive. And after that, it stops working, because that tells us, right? Like that's the way we're going to balance between autonomy and supervision. There were some things that I can't remember exactly how it was set up, but there was, some thoughtful design about, we're going to give the parent like I think it was like a fuzzed location, but not an exact location, right? Or we only give location after such and such time. Like they had thought about kind of how to mitigate this. And obviously, like different families have different preferences. Preferences within families change over time. Another big thing is like features, I think that necessitate the conversation, right? So surreptitious monitoring is kind of a no-go, right? Like both Apple and Google, I think, have really cracked down on that, or trying to crack down on that in their apps that can be used for this purpose, or with moderate success. But they talk about it, at least, that they don't want to have an app.
They talk about
it. Right. But that, at least, in theory, means that if you're tracking your teen's phone, maybe they know about it, right? Or they're more likely to know about it than if the app is hidden. So there's no good answer, right? And I find myself, I have little kids, so I find myself going back and forth on this all the time.
So, I mean, is there research on so surveillance in our world, we've kind of gotten to the Big Brother stage in a lot of ways that we're all being tracked in a lot of detail all the time. It just wasn't quite government the way we thought it would be. It ended up being these big corporations who want to understand us to get us to buy stuff. So I don't imagine that that's super well understood, the psychological effects of that on the people being monitored, but it can't be good to have people study this in the context of families, because I think families allow for a kind of natural experiment. There's some families that are more, what do they say, enmeshed or what, there's more boundaries and less boundaries. And my brother outlaw, we call him, because we still have a relationship with him, but he's not, he got divorced from our family. So he's not part of our family anymore, but we call him the brother outlaw. My former brother-in-law, let's just say, he grew up, his mom was very afraid of what the kids were doing behind closed doors. She removed all the doors in the house so that the kids didn't have bedroom doors. And I don't think that led to good outcomes for the kids. So does your work ever take you into the space of what is the psychological effect on people of being, panopticon?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I don't do a lot of this. I don't do psychological research, so I don't do that work myself. But, one of the arguments that a lot of people make is that even things like the elf on the shelf. Do you guys know the elf on the shelf? Like the Christmas, the little
not
guy.
Exactly. We had a mensch on a bench.
I don't.
I was going to say the mensch on the bench was more familiar for me too. But the elf on the shelf this is like a zero tech thing. But there's some kid's story, I think, about an elf, Santa's elf, that you move around your house. And in theory,
how else would he know if you're naughty or you're nice, right?
Yeah,
so he reports
is
back
he's
to
a
the
narc. He's a narc, says Santa. And what the parent is supposed to do is
narc in the park.
Exactly. So
this is a real thing that people use to capitalize on the Santa thing to say, wow, I didn't know.
Put it in a public place, and then the kids they believe they're being watched all the time. But you're saying when you say
no
tech,
it moves around, right? So you move it after your kids go to bed, so that every day the kids are is not really watching. It's panoptic, right? Like you don't know,
and that proves it.
And that proves it, right? So the reason I bring it up, right, is that people often talk about technology like that, or actual the thing that your I don't even know how she's related to your ex-mother-in-law, whatever.
Oh, the brother outlaw's mother.
Brother outlaw's mother did with doors. That those types of moves, maybe at the very least, they kind of inure people to surveillance, right? So when we, I think we probably all think about this even more now with, kids having been in virtual school for a couple of years, the degree to which children may just come to see this as what life is, and normal, and I don't know. I'm always hesitant to say something is all good or all bad, or that, every practice is 100%. If it invades privacy a little bit, then we should throw it away. There's obviously a balance to be struck here. But I do think that that's a real concern, right?
Well, you've got these papers that have stalker right in the title. And
it's dark, eh?
Well, right. And, and yes, I guess what I want to what gets me is it does feel like there's recurring motifs of loss of privacy as a property of information technology expansion, and just to go to say it's a case by case basis is to overlook that, wow, there really is this central tendency of it being more bad than good, you know.
I think that's right. I don't know what to do with it though, right? I mean,
Yeah.
I'm kind of a big fan of the case by case basis, only because I think the broad brush is not wrong normatively, but from a policy perspective or a design perspective, I'm not sure. I know that a lot of people write a lot of books about surveillance capitalism and about, big tech, and I think that stuff is right. I'm glad someone's saying it. It tends not to be my approach just because I think that work is being done very competently and I don't have a great like then what as the follow-up beyond like just
Right.
revolution.
Right. But let's
Dave,
leap
you want the
after the
revolution?
revolution. Okay. No. I want to get past that. I want to say, let's at least figure out what maybe we could want. And just to state that clearly, even if there's no path from here to there, there could be value in just saying what we want. And so my big rant about all this is it feels like information technology and communications and so forth is triggering the early stages of kind of a major evolutionary transition in the organization of life on Earth. And there's this open question as to what kind of next level structure or next 2 or 3 levels of structure will end up governing human society. And there's kind of the China model with tons of surveillance backed by state power to maintain control. And there's the sort of the oligarchic whatever, the clash of the titans, the most rich people until there's just the Highlander, the one most rich person, and that's it. And is there hope? Is there a way that we could get to something that was the vision of democracy and individual liberty, and try to say there is a way that we could come up with a balance and have structure at multiple levels, not just drones and the state like that, and that people, I think, like you, Karen, who are thinking about these things on a case-by-case basis, should be, part of the natural constituency to say, what do we want? Well, if we could have it, let's just paint the picture of what we could want. Does that make any sense?
I think that makes a lot of sense. I mean, I think it in some ways comes back to well, like everything to me, it comes back to truck drivers, right? In the same way that I think we've implemented this technology in trucking to solve the wrong problem, right? Like there's an economic problem and a social problem. And we say, don't look at that. Like, let me give you this digital band-aid that's going to just like kind of solve the problem a little bit, or at least like make it go away. I feel like that's often what we end up doing with technology. And so I think to say, like to your point, Dave, to solve the problem of technology is really maybe not about technology at all, right? Or I think a lot of it ends up about being about, how do we create societies with social safety nets so that you don't feel like you have to keep an eye on your grandmother in the nursing home because you're not worried that she's not going to get the attention she needs, which she's only not getting that attention because we don't provide funding. But like to me, it often all comes back to that. And so we use this as sort of not everything, right? But we often, I think, use surveillance technology as a stopgap to mitigate risk. And there are other ways that we can mitigate risk, but they're expensive, and they're often expensive, or they diminish power for people who have a lot of power, so they're not popular. But oftentimes I think that's the choice that we end up making, is we just kind of like put some computers on it and we say, well, that's that now that's the system. And to your point from earlier, right, like that often then kind of just snowballs onto itself and it becomes hard to undo it once it's part of the infrastructure.
It seems to me that there ought to be a way to have, the home system or something like that, by which it's not Nest, it's not Siri, it's not Google Voice, whatever it is. It's
Hmm.
the thing that is yours. And the emphasis is on figuring out how to make it so self-administering that it will have relatively limited features, but it will be yours. And you won't need updates, you won't take software updates. And then we can have the argument about how you don't get to talk to me. You have to talk to my home system first. You can't guarantee that my eyeballs are looking at your advertisement. You have to let my home system sniff over it first and decide whether it's
Hmm.
worth interrupting my attention. Something like that. Some way to.
Hmm.
I don't know. I don't
Yeah,
know how to
yeah.
do it. I just know.
I can see that.
I mean,
I still think we'd have problems, to be honest with you, because when you say
for
your
sure.
home, a lot of the stuff I'm
Well,
thinking about is like actually like whose home? Whose home is that? Is that the person who bought the thing? Is that the man of the house?
yeah.
Is that, right? So I agree with I mean, which
Uh,
honestly it often is. Uh
I, I mean, the
Yeah, and
thing that I really
if
want
it's
to push.
rented, or
It,
if it's a rental through your company, yeah, it can get really complicated.
right.
But I don't
But I
think
think
well,
where
it
but
gave
that's
it.
that, that's why I really think in terms of the microcomputome, something that's associated with an individual, not even a home, but my body. And there's
Mhm.
much less argument about, from the skin in, I should have special privileges over that space,
Yeah.
and I'm not renting it. The company shouldn't have too much claim on it. Even if I have a heart valve put in, the company should have very limited claim on the heart valve once it's in me, and so on.
Yeah.
And that, you begin with physical space, you begin with the actual universe real, instead of beginning at Amazon Web Services, instead of
Hmm.
beginning at the top, you build up from the bottom, something like
Hmm.
that.
Hmm.
How to do it? I don't know. I try day to day. If I can change the subject, because there's so much stuff that, when I was looking at your stuff, that was interesting to me, and so street smart versus book smart. You had this paper about blockchain smart contracts,
Hmm.
and that is something that I had thought, back in the early days of crypto and digital stuff and so on. It was like, this is going to be great. I mean, I even had a DARPA contract in the 90s about
Oh wow.
making an automated rule following system where there would be a website where people could propose changes to the website rules written in a Lisp variation, and then they could vote on them. And if the vote passed according to the existing rules, the rules would be changed automatically like that. So this was the book smart, the instantly enforced contracts. Uh,
Hmm.
um, and as I got older and continued to deal with stuff, it became so much more clear what your paper was saying, that the crisp part of a contract is really just sort of aspirational at some level, and full of all these stuff of that's less formal and less formalizable, that goes all around it. And to think
Hmm.
that you can automate the formal part of it and that you've really accomplished much of anything is kind of missing the bigger point. I mean, did I get the gist of it?
I think I mean, yeah, that's probably better said than I put it. I think there are contexts, right, where there's more. No, I really, that was good. I should put that in the paper. Where there are more or less where there is more or less social stuff, right? Like there are certainly contexts, like I don't know, tax enforcement or something, like places where we want pretty straightforward rules. The social parts are there, but they're less important. But I think you're right that
Right.
often, especially like for consumer or like, business to business or person to person contracts, the agreement itself, like you miss the forest for the trees if you only look at, me saying I will pay you X to do Y, right? Like that's just not what a contract is, right? That's like a thin notion of what a contract is.
Right.
Yeah.
But us good old boy IT guys want to take that West Coast Lessig code notion
Yeah.
and run with it,
Yeah.
and sort of impose it on humans and society and so on. And that seems like sort of like bad on its face. I mean, I guess, well, I don't know. I don't have any real message or real solution, but just that it really does feel to me the East Coast code, West Coast code, yes, 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 yes. But how can we resolve all of the non-crisp part that
Yeah.
is really the mountain to the iceberg tip?
Yeah, no, it's a good
Uh,
question. And I mean, I just think the answer is you don't, right? Which like
yeah,
is good and bad. Like there are plenty of ways in which people don't get what's due to them. You do not have to look far to find people not getting what they're owed under contracts
sure.
because they're under resourced or they're dealing with a big giant company or we don't really get to negotiate contracts. We it's like a legal fiction, right? We tell ourselves that everyone is there's a meeting of the minds, but there's not, right? In 99% of cases. So it's not that that's a perfect way of doing things either. But
Right.
if the goal is to convert one to the other, we should account for what's going to be lost, right? It's kind of like the same motif we've been coming back to, which is that like, yeah, sometimes when you have a rule or a set of expectations and you've written them down, but like you kind of know that that's like not really the way it's going to go. Plenty of bad stuff can happen, right? Like people can misbehave, and sometimes writing stuff down and agreeing to it is an important protection, especially for vulnerable
Right.
people. But sometimes there's lots of socially useful stuff that happens because we didn't write it down, right? Like I'm sure everyone can think of plenty of examples in their own lives and careers, maybe where a little opacity can help people, right? Can help people.
Right. I mean, so one of my hobby horses is structure at all scales. And so in order to have agency, I need a certain amount of privacy so I can cook stuff that's not ready and then just give the answer.
Yeah.
And then families need a little bit, and it would be good if my side of the street could have some of it, and on up. But it seems like we keep getting forced towards efficiency grounds for squeezing out all the structure.
You're saying that
Well,
that we basically, we flatten the hierarchy in some sense, right? And so there's really
right
just the
there,
top level gets its say.
there's you and there's Facebook, and there's nothing of substance in between you. There's no you joining a third party Facebook citizens union to negotiate with Facebook for fewer ads or something like that. Facebook gives you groups, but they're very limited in what they can do.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's informal things, right? So within Facebook, you could have like the people you're friends with, you could say, well, we don't talk about that. Like, please don't bring up that topic. We've agreed not to do that. So you can have some kinds of agreements and flexibility and rules imposed at a sub level, but it's not enforced by Facebook. But of course, it's not enforced by Facebook, right? That would be giving it back over to Facebook. So is that the kind of thing that you're thinking about?
Well, that's part of it. I mean, I think there's a sense in which the internet, with anybody can talk to anybody, which is true in a large degree and false in a large degree. Da 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 da. But there is a sense in which it can be an absolutely unbelievable tool for organizing, bottom up stuff, flash mobs, the Hong Kong kids and all of that stuff that are fighting against state or various other kinds of repressive forces. And, as long as there's a way that you can communicate at all with other folks, then there is the potential for a brush fire to spark up of a new idea, new code that people start. I mean, and Me Too is a poster child. So I'm not 100% sure on how Facebook can control it. If Facebook allows people to talk,
Mm-hmm.
then there's always the risk that the people will start saying stuff that Facebook doesn't like, and using Facebook groups to organize against Facebook and so forth is a real thing. It's a possible thing, but it's different that in the sense that they can pull the plug if they want to, just like a country can pull the plug on their BGP peering and drop off the internet if they want to. So there's a sense in which it's all at the liberty of the power structures that control the larger pipelines, something like that. And it doesn't have to be, right? Because you go outside, you yell over the back fence to the neighbors, is your internet down too, or whatever it is, then, there's no separate control over that. That's actually you going via the physics, via your own channel. And I don't know. just all about the building up from the bottom.
Yeah. So owning the space around you, you approve of this sort of notion that we all plug into this virtual space where there is no around you. There's just the space that is then owned by or controlled by some other organization, takes that away from you. You don't get to have any of that.
Right.
Yeah. Interesting.
Right. That's what we need to do. We need to push out our physical space into information space around us, that to begin with, it will be co-located with our physical space, like our bodies or our household or whatever it happens to be, if we're lucky enough to have a household. And then only then does it start to leap into more abstract ways of connecting through switching networks and stuff like that.
All right,
anyway.
well, so we're running a little bit out of time, but I wanted to get Karen's take on, you mentioned that you're in an information school, which I think for a lot of people is an unfamiliar concept because they're not quite universal yet. But
yeah, even within them, nobody really knows what they are.
Is that right? So I was wondering if you could just give me your take. What's the history? What is the status of this as an entity? I know that when I was department chair at Rutgers of computer science, during my tenure as chair, the CRA, Computing Research Associates, went for is that who I'm thinking of? Yeah, I think they run the Talby survey, and so they do a kind of survey of all computing units, at least in the country, in the U.S. I don't know if it's in the world or not.
Yes.
And,
North America.
Okay, and while I was chair, they switched from basically just focused on computer science departments and engineering schools that had computer science departments or EECS to including information schools as part of that broader computing community. And so it feels like a still relatively fresh thing. So what, how they doing?
What? How are they doing? I think they're doing good. I also had no idea what information science or iSchools were until I applied for this job.
Okay.
And I think that's often true of a lot of people as they enter. They're like, what is this thing I'm getting into?
So where did this even start? Is this something that happened at one place in the world, and then other people are like, actually, that's a good idea, and it's sort of slowly being copied?
I think there've been kind of two routes. One route is that some information science programs or informatics programs have come up kind of from library science, right? Which also think a lot about IR and, how do people communicate around technology. That's one route, although Cornell has not taken that route. That's one model. Here, I believe that our department is, I think, about 20 years old, and it started out as a collaboration among folks in computer science and communication and OR, and maybe there's one other econ, maybe. So ours is quite technical. I'm in Gates Hall along with computer science. Most of our people are also in computer science, probably, 50% or more than that are technical folks. So as iSchools go, or information science departments go, Cornell is on the computational end, which is super fun for me because, I teach a class with John Kleinberg. I never would have thought that, why would that ever happen? That wasn't what I thought was it's great. I don't mean it in a negative way. I just mean many of my collaborations now are with computer scientists, which is super fun. It's it's a playground, right, for people who want to do interdisciplinary work. In many ways, actually, Michael, the AI 100 panel felt kind of like an iSchool in that it was pulling in all these people who look at technology from different angles. And the idea, hopefully, is that, by doing that, you end up with something that no single discipline can do itself, and you appreciate multiple methods and ways of knowing. And the students are awesome. The students really have to be kind of entrepreneurs because it's a new discipline. But I love it. I'm having a ton of fun hanging out here.
That's really cool. And you had mentioned that you were at Princeton and there was an IT, information technology something. But
Center for IT Policy. Yeah.
But it's not, okay. So it's more a policy centered thing. So it's not an iSchool per se.
No, Princeton doesn't have that. Although they have, lots of, I feel like we don't say woke anymore, but they have lots of socially aware computing folks there who care. Ed Feldman was there at that time, and Arvind Rayanan and other folks who think a lot about kind of the social impacts of computing.
That's awesome.
Policy level stuff, yeah.
Policy stuff, yeah.
And you had a period at the Data and Society Institute in New York, is that right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I did a postdoc that was between Data and Society and the NYU Law School.
Becca Lewis was
Oh,
at
yeah.
Data and Society and did that report about YouTube.
Yeah.
And she's a friend of the family, so that's the
Oh,
only reason
cool.
I knew about Data and Society.
Yeah, we didn't overlap, but
Yeah,
I've read her work. She does really awesome work.
and well, so to bring it in for a landing, then. So, are we screwed? Is there hope? And if there is a glimmer of hope in all this, what should we be doing about it?
I mean, wow, that is a tough note to end on. I mean, I don't know. I don't tend to be, I think, as doom and gloom as tech critics tend to be, primarily just because I think the world is a very complicated place, and I think like there's no easy answers to problems, which is like simultaneously depressing and also maybe freeing if you just accept that everything is going to end up being a balance. Obviously, there are definitely political and economic reforms I think would be really important, and I think, I don't know, this sounds really cheesy, but I'll say it anyway. Like, I'm very heartened by students, like seeing the students that come through CS and IS at Cornell and like just how serious they are about wanting to do something valuable. I imagine you guys see this too.
Right.
Obviously, like it shouldn't be on their shoulders. Like there are a lot of, structural things that we should be doing to ensure that computing is a net positive for the world. But I don't know. I feel this is my 6th year as a faculty member, and I feel like even in this relatively short time, the level of awareness and of, kind of principle that seems to be emerging in these students, and the recognition that like a technical problem isn't just a technical problem that you solve because it's fun or it makes you feel excited, right? And you do it with pizza and your sweatpants and then you're done. Like nobody has that view, right? And I was really kind of expecting more of that. So that makes me feel some level of hope.
That's progress already, is what you're saying. And
I feel that way. I mean, I'm curious what you guys think about that. Are you really depressed?
Well, I'm depressed a lot, but I don't know. I'm not sure if that's because of.
No, but you're stressed about this topic in particular.
About this topic in particular, yeah, the prognosis and so forth. But I am encouraged, like you, Karen, I think, by the kids these days, and they're not all young and so forth. But the awareness of broader context, the awareness of you have to put whatever this thing is in embedded context before you can even evaluate it. Number one, and if you haven't put it into an embedded context, your job isn't done. You can't just say, "Oh, this is a great idea. Let's run with it." And to me, I think maybe one of the things that it seems like the internet has done is, and maybe these social networks have done, is make the people aware of both sides more clearly. That, well, you can't say that because the flip side is then they could say this. And so in order to get to that the internet is teaching us rhetoric. It's teaching us oratory in some sense in middle school, basically, when we first show up on this. And therefore, when people try to pull these lines on us, which is the way it's always been done, it doesn't have as much traction because people know how to come back at that. And to me, that's encouraging because I think the evil side, the bad side, is always built on a foundation of hypocrisy and fraud. And if we can call that out, we can put them on the run. At least that's my fantasy.
Yeah. No, I can totally see that. My daughter did virtual 3rd grade from our bed, from like the kitchen table last year. So I got to listen to a lot of it. And the first thing they did was they had to practice in like the Zoom chat or the Google Classroom chat. How do I respond to somebody in a way that tells them that I disagree with them, but respectfully? They had like practiced internet rhetoric. And she's 8. And I thought that was awesome, right?
That's
awesome.
super.
It was really cool.
Exactly.
Yeah. So I don't know. I mean, I didn't look and see what she said. Maybe she said something terrible, but I have to think that learning those skills early, that there is some hope, right? That it isn't just a cesspool. But we can revisit 10 years ago.
I've been thinking about that too. So yeah, I feel very bad in some sense. The situation that we're in with social media and so forth, I think it's ultimately going to benefit society, but it's not benefiting society quite yet. And it's because we have to learn how to work in this system in a way that's actually productive. And we're kind of leaving it up to like our kids to figure it out. And I told that to my daughter. I'm like, it's kind of on you. I'm sorry. I wish it wasn't. I wish I could fix this for you, but like, you guys have to figure this out. But I believe in you because you're people, and this is what people do. Like, people don't just, give up.
Children are the future. That's the conclusion.
Well, yeah, I mean, of course, it's lame, perhaps, but it's also true, and it really does seem like there's a chance for progress. So we can hope for the best. Karen, this has been a whole lot of fun. I really enjoyed meeting you a little bit and getting to talk. Thanks so much for coming to talk to us today.
It was great. Thank you for having me.
This was Computing Up. Thanks for listening.